in our series called The Walk. And just by way of introduction, a little thought for you. Who's fascinated by fashions across the years? So like when you look back at old photographs and you look and you see, oh yeah, how did we get away with wearing that? What the heck was that? What was that hairstyle? And you look at everyone copies someone, don't they? There's as I've grown older, I've noticed that fashions, and I can't believe I'm saying this, the fashions are now coming back around. And I find myself saying, I remember that from the 90s. And I think, oh man, that's like 40 years ago, because I turned 40 this year. It's alright, we'll have counselling later. But fashions change and adapt with time, don't they? They're constantly moving. Everyone copies something, and I've noticed that whenever I go to various church events and conferences, there's usually a telltale sign of who comes from which church. So I used to go to a ladies' conference a few years ago, and all the ladies from that church had a particular style. You could tell by the shoes they wore. They all looked like they'd just bought the whole of Topshop, if you remember Topshop, and they'd all turned up in their Topshop outfits. But a few weeks ago, we went to an AOG area day, there were a few of us, and there were several of us that turned up in skinny jeans, boots, and a check jacket. I was like, is this your church style? We're all just that cool. I just wanted to blend in and look like I fit in. And there was a time a few years ago where we had some people come from another church, and they said, oh, what is it with you guys? You're all wearing long tops and skinny jeans and fluffy boots. Is that like your church uniform? Like, no, it's just the style of life. So you can usually tell who belongs to who by how they dress and how they act. And in the first part of this series, a few weeks ago, when James introduced our series, The Walk, there were three main points that James brought to us about what it means to be a disciple of Jesus and what it means to walk well with Jesus. And those three things are to become like him, to be with Jesus, become like him, and do as he did. So that's inspired by John Mark Comer's Practicing the Way. If you haven't got your hands on a copy of the book, get your hands on a copy because it is brilliant. And over the next 2 weeks, we're going to be looking at what it means to become like Jesus. And we're going to break it down into two parts. So the first part, we're going to be looking a little bit deeper about what it means to become like Jesus. So unpacking more of what it looks like to be an apprentice of Jesus. So that's the process of developing our character, our formation, thinking about who we are becoming. And the second part, next week, we're going to think about how we become like Jesus, because otherwise that's a bit of a meaty thing to try and get through in one morning. So I thought breaking it down would be a better thing, because there are things in our lives that we may need to assess, we may need to revisit, we may need to overcome some things to become like Jesus, and there are some practical ways that we can do that. But today we're thinking about the process. And I say that because becoming like Jesus isn't a fashion. It's not something that changes from time to time. It's something that we as disciples should eagerly seek to do in our everyday lives. Being a disciple of Jesus means that we are recognised for who we belong to. Our walk with Jesus should be evident. And back to the first message, when James introduced this series, he asked us this question: who influences you? Who are you following? Who are you imitating? And I want to revisit this briefly this week so that we can understand what it then means to become like Jesus. Because reality is that we are all becoming like those people that we surround ourselves with. And there's an invitation for each of us to practice Jesus' way. There's an invitation for us to get stuck into the way, whatever stage of our faith journey we are on. We're all invited to be an apprentice of Jesus. And that's the real challenge, I think, to consider how much am I apprenticing under Jesus. We know that Jesus invites us to walk with him. He invites us to work with him. He invites us to watch how he does it. That's our verse that we looked at the last couple of weeks, Matthew 11:28. But if we don't get with the training program, then we're not going to move much further than that. If we don't get stuck in and sitting with God in his presence. That's a really nice place to be. If I could choose to sit every day in my living room, on my sofa, with my Bible and my cup of coffee, and just go, Lord, this is lovely. I'd be a bit like Billy and Jeff on the balcony, and they're like, I'd be sat there, but I wouldn't get much further than that. Being in God's presence is a good place to be, but an apprentice needs to make a move and needs to learn on the job. We can't stay sat at the desk. So, practicing the way of Jesus requires action. As a musician, if I simply look at the instrument, music doesn't come from the instrument. It takes action. It takes me getting the plugs out, using my hands, actually practicing the instrument. If a football player looks at a football, the ball doesn't move, does it? It requires action. It takes skill and playing the game, getting involved. So to become like Jesus requires action. It requires us to do something, to accept the invite to apprenticeship and then walk with God in our daily lives. And I think the first thing that we need to understand is that there is a process to becoming like Jesus. It's not something that happens overnight. When things are formed or put together, there are always stages. I think of Lego kits. And the bigger the Lego kit goes, the more bags there are and the more booklets there are of instructions. The Lego kit doesn't just get built, does it? It takes time, it takes a process. And becoming like Jesus is about formation. We're constantly being formed by something or someone, or maybe the world around us. So to be formed by Jesus requires us to be his apprentice. And we do that by looking at the way Jesus showed us how to live, how to walk with him each day. He shows us what's good, and he tells us how to walk effectively as his apprentice, to show that we are learning from him, to show that we are becoming like him. That's what being a disciple is. And one of my favourite little pieces of scripture is in Micah 6, verse 8, and this is from the NIV. It says, "He has shown you, O mortal, what is good. And what does the Lord require of you? To act justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God." Absolutely love those verses for what it means for us to walk well with Jesus. So let's unpack this a little bit more, because this is a verse that summarises how people should live. We should do justice. We should love mercy. We should walk humbly with God. This is what Jesus is trying to teach us as he says, become my apprentice, learn from me. And there's a real emphasis, isn't there, here on right living, compassion, right relationship with God, rather than getting stuck in a rut of the rituals of church where you get up and you think, oh, the alarm's gone off, right, I need to be ready by this time, I need to be out the door by this time, right, at this point in the service I'm going to raise my hand, and at this point in their service I'm going to stand up, sit down. We can get stuck in those rituals, but it's not about that. There's a reminder here to actively pursue fairness, to show kindness, to live dependently on God, because it's a call to godly action, deep empathy, and complete dependence on him. And the reality is, and this is the hard bit, we can't skip the process. We can't skip the process. There is a process to us becoming like Jesus. And here's the process. We accept the invite. We become formed. So we go through the process of thinking maybe, how can I be more like Jesus in this situation? How can I become more like him? So how can I just demonstrate more justice? How can I demonstrate more mercy? So when you're driving along and your driver's in the room and that person cuts you up, you're like, oh, stop cutting me up. Oh, Lord bless you. Have a great day in Jesus' name. I did actually have an incident like that a few weeks ago where it was like almost red rag to a bull, where this gentleman got a little bit cross with me in the car park, and he told me I needed to learn some manners, and I just turned to him and I said, I have got some manners. I'm ever so sorry I've upset you. Have a wonderful day. And I walked off and I had this moment of, oh, and it could have been terrible, it could have got ugly, but I had that moment of going, natural me would have gone, come on then, let's have you. Out the car, let's go. But actually, there's a moment of going, oh, Lord, what would you do in this situation? Okay, let's go with that. And then we continually learn. We grow in His way. We make a daily choice, make a daily commitment, and then we go on to show other people how to live and how to apprentice under Jesus. So the way that I live should be showing my family first how to become more like Jesus. Should be showing James how to become more like Jesus. He should be showing me how to become more like Jesus. My children, I should be showing them. They in turn should be showing me. And sometimes they do, and that's really challenging if you've got kids and they do nicer things than you. But it's a daily commitment, it's a daily process. You wake up in the morning, you say, God, today I accept the invite of being your apprentice. Yeah. You become formed. You get to work and somebody's, either the biggest bugbear when I was a teacher, somebody's used my coffee mug. How rude. It's just a mug. We can leave it. There are other mugs in the cupboard. It's okay. Yes, but Lord, that's my mug. Oh, no. You can drink coffee from another mug. And then you think, okay, a little bit of patience, a little bit of grace, okay? And then we learn and we grow through that experience and we show others by the way that we are into how to be an apprentice of Jesus. It's a daily process, and how smooth this process goes largely is down to us. How well this process goes is largely down to us. God is always there, ready and willing to be working with us. Because when Jesus called his disciples, he invited them to go on a journey, to go somewhere, not to be someone. He says, come with me, come follow me. And the disciples were given a new purpose to embrace Jesus' way, to see where it would take them. When we begin this process, we begin to see where Jesus wants to take us. We learn Jesus' way. And I think we need to have a greater depth of understanding of what it really means to be an apprentice of Jesus. We need to fully embrace what it means for us to become like him. John Mark Comer in his book puts it like this: for Jesus, the point of apprenticeship was to be with him for the purpose of becoming like him. Be with him for the purpose of becoming like him. Yeah. There was an in-depth training program for the disciples when they dropped their nets and followed him. There was a journey of formation. There was lots of lessons, lots of praise points, lots of learning curves, lots of mistakes, lots of lessons. But the goal of them being an apprentice was to become like him. And just thinking back to my earlier comments, people should be able to recognise who you are learning from as you go through your life. Who are you becoming? Yeah. You know, if we're going to apprentice under Jesus, we should be becoming more like him, and that should be recognisable in our lives. We should resemble something of our teacher. I know that when I completed my A-level studies at school, you could tell who I'd been taught by the way I wrote my essays. The way that I spoke, the way that I presented arguments, namely my philosophy and RE teachers, they had a massive impact in how I present things, how I write. Yeah. When I play the piano, you can see traits of my teacher in the way that I play. There's little bits that I play. I resemble what they have taught me. And when it comes to faith, when it comes to being a disciple, when it comes to our walk with Jesus, do we resemble him in our daily lives? Are we becoming more like him? And like we said, the reality is that becoming like Jesus is a process, no matter how far along this journey you are on. But the thing is, we need to see that we have the potential to become what Jesus says that we can become. When I trained to be a teacher, I had some natural gifting for preparing lessons, creating resources. I had some form of confidence for standing up in front of people, but I needed people who would develop that in me so that I could become the only teacher that I could be. As disciples, we have an immense capacity. Jesus sees our capacity. The question is, are we ready and willing to go through the process of becoming the disciple that Jesus knows that we can be? It's a process. It's not something that just happens to us. It's transformation. It's making ourselves available. If we don't make ourselves available, then we're not going to get very far along the process. You know, the disciples, it says they dropped their nets and followed him. They made themselves available. They said, I'm just going to keep my net with me. They didn't say that. They dropped their nets and followed Jesus. And when we cooperate with God, he completes his good work in us. What is it? Philippians 1:6 tells us, I am sure of this, that he who started a good work in you will carry it on to completion until the day of Christ Jesus.
Yeah.
Whatever stage we are at when Jesus returns, God will keep working in us to develop us into the disciple that we can be. And another challenging point, I think, is that maybe intentionally or unintentionally, we can opt out of the process of becoming like Jesus. Sometimes we might go through our lives and maybe not realise that we've strayed away from the walk that Jesus is calling us to live. It's good to assess where you're at and say, okay, today, where am I in that cycle of the process? Yeah. Have I this morning accepted the invite? What's your trajectory? Are you being formed into becoming like Jesus? Or are you becoming more like something or someone else? And as we think about that process of accepting the invite, being formed, learning and growing, and going back round to then showing other people, what does this process of Jesus, becoming like Jesus, look like? And I think there are 4 areas that we can look at in ourselves to see how we're doing on becoming like Jesus. And the first one is our appearance. So this is about how we come across to the world around us. Our appearance will say a lot about who is influencing us and will show how close you are to becoming more like Jesus. It's challenging because I've sat with this week and gone, oh, how am I doing on becoming more like Jesus? How is my appearance? Do people know that I follow him? And just thinking about my teacher training again, there was one particular morning where I turned up to my placement and I realised I'd morphed into my mentor. So I turned up, I had my sunglasses on my head, I had my hair beautifully straightened, I had a black top on, I had some grey cropped trousers and some flat black shoes. And I walked in, and then my mentor came down the corridor. She had her sunglasses on her head, she had her hair beautifully straightened, she had a black top on, grey cropped trousers and flat black shoes, and I just went, I think I've morphed into you. My appearance resembled that of the one who is teaching me, and even down to some of the things I learned in the classroom, the way to teach, the way to command authority. People were responding to what they saw. I began to look like a teacher, so people responded to that. And the more we abide with Jesus, we should be overflowing with justice, with mercy, with genuine kindness and a humble nature. So how's your appearance in becoming like Jesus?
That's good, Diane.
Great.
Second one is our movement. And by this I mean, how is your presence in any given space? Are you the one who brings the light and the joy? Not saying we don't have bad days, because we do, but are we the person who has the dark cloud on our head and when we walk into the room, everyone knows? Oh, I don't want to be that person. How do you present yourself in the room? Is it clear by your words, your actions, your language, that you're being transformed to be like Jesus? Little illustration again, I had the privilege a few years ago of watching a student that I taught at school fulfill her dream of becoming a dance teacher. I'd seen her perform at many school shows and all of those things, and I could see her mannerisms, her skill and her passion for dance that she had. And then she went on to become a dance teacher. And when I watched the dance shows, I could tell the pupils that she had taught, their movements, their grace, their energy, the way that they held themselves, their smile, all of those things. It became like their teacher. They resembled the person they were learning from. Do people know who you've been influenced by? Do they know that Jesus is forming you? Do your movements in life resemble his? Thirdly, our perception. And this is about our perception of things, not necessarily people's perception of us, but how we perceive things. How do we approach things? How are we thinking like Jesus when we look at different situations? I think of James at this point when I look at how he approaches DIY and building work. He's learned very well from his dad. And his dad has a way, he has a method, he has a process. And James's approach is very much the same. He looks and he goes, oh yeah, okay, mark this bit out. And then we've got to make sure it's level, spirit level. And then have we got that corner and all that? And how's it looking? Is it straight? Is it? And it's very, very meticulous. Very much like his dad. The way he thinks, the way he approaches a task is the same. Is our perception the same as Jesus? You know, if we're being formed by him, or if we're being formed by him, our thought process should be the same as his. We should aim to think like he does. So when the disciples got annoyed at the little children, no, don't let the children bother Jesus. Jesus went, I don't know, let the little children come to me. Oh no, don't bother them. They don't want that. Hang on, what would Jesus say? When the Pharisees wanted to stone the woman who was caught in adultery, Jesus said, no. He was without sin, cast the first stone. Yeah. How's our judgment levels? How are we doing in our thoughts when it comes to resembling the one we're learning from? Fourthly, our manner. What kind of manner do we have? Are the ways of the world around us more prevalent, or are the ways of Jesus and the fruit of the Spirit pouring out of us? I think back to a time when I'd gone round to a family's house from church, and I'd been there for about an hour, and I'd had a cup of tea, because I felt very grown up at the age of 10, having a cup of tea. And they said, oh, we're just going to wash these pots. And I said, oh, I'll wash them and dry them for you. There was only about 4 cups. So I washed them and dried them. And then they said to me, I bet you don't do the drying up at home, do you? And I said, no, actually, I don't. And then, all of a sudden, there's a knock at the door, and it's my mum, and they went, oh, quick, don't let your mum see that you're drying up here. And I got in such a panic that I dropped the cup, and I broke this lovely china cup, and I panicked. But do you know what? The man of the house was confusing. It's only a cup. Don't worry about it. He was so kind, he was so patient, he was so gentle, and I learned a lot from that family and from that incident, because what happened was the things of the Spirit flowed from him, not the, oh man, you broke my cup, you're not allowed to come back here again. They were so gracious. And you know, we see this in John the Baptist's ministry. He declared that he must increase, but I must decrease. There must be more of Jesus. That's John 3, verse 30. There must be more of Jesus. He must be exalted, not us. Our human nature needs to decrease so that he can increase, so the fruit of the Spirit can thrive, and so that the way of God's kingdom can prevail in the world. So if you haven't picked up on it, it's a 24-hour thing. AM to PM. Appearance, movement, perception, and manner. We're in a constant process, a 24-hour process of being formed when we choose to apprentice under Jesus and learn his way. And we're going to come more on to the how next week, but we will then learn to act justly, love mercy, and walk humbly in our everyday morning, evening, in the house, out the house, at work, at church, as disciples, whoever we are, being an apprentice of Jesus, we're called to become more like him in our appearance, our movement, our perception, our manner. Becoming like Jesus is full of learning, influence, and process. It isn't always easy, but if we're committed to the invitation that Jesus gives us every day, then our walk with Jesus will be so much more effective. I wonder if you could just come up and play Make Room, just as I'm bringing this into a close. Because what an honour and what an opportunity we have in the fact that we have the ability and the capacity opportunity to become like Jesus. I think that's amazing. That actually we don't just have to stay as we are. We can go through the process. And as I was thinking about this week, I was thinking that God could have made mankind in such a way that we weren't given the opportunity or the ability to grow and go through the process to become like him. He could have made us in a way that didn't open that up for us. We're constantly being formed by the things in the world, by the things that go on around us. And to truly become like Jesus, we need to go through the process. We need to get serious about it. We need to not just sit in the space where we have the quiet time, abiding with God. We need to abide with him out in the world as well. It's not just about an overnight thing or clicking your fingers and it changing, or a simple recreation or repeating certain actions. There's an opportunity for us to grow and develop. If we're going to become more like Jesus so the world around us can see, we need to fully accept that invitation to apprentice under him, to complete the process. The more time we spend with Jesus, the easier it will become. And when we realise that Jesus is available to us every moment of our lives, we'll move through that, simply having that quiet time to actively seeking him in the everyday, so that people can see in our appearance, our movement, our perception, our manner, that we are becoming like him. It's not a quick fix, it's a process. And you know, if you are sitting here today thinking, yeah, I want to be on that process, I want to be on that journey, I'm going to invite you to just stand where you are, and we're just going to worship with this song that simply says, make room. I'm going to make room. I'm going to look at my life, I'm going to look at those 4 areas and go, God, how can I become more like you in the areas that I am living in? Be encouraged that it is a process. Some days might see more progress than others. That's okay. That's okay. The point is that we need to be aware of the process and be aware of where we're at. And be encouraged that every morning you can get up and say, God, today I choose to learn from you